the auction and issuance of leases. Vineyard Wind was the beneficiary of one of those leases, which is what now appears to be the, how shall I call that, the off-white in the slide there. And in following after that in 2015, the Massachusetts legislature, in following with the Global Warming Solutions Act, which mandated carbon reductions at the state level, passed the Energy Diversity Act, which mandated, among other things, an increase in offshore wind to be brought into the grid. There was a solicitation, a competitive process among the companies to bring Vineyard Wind, to bring offshore wind into our grid. And Vineyard Wind was the sole winner of a 800 megawatt bid to supply roughly 5.5% to 6% of the state's electrical load with the project. Ooh, did I press the wrong button? Thank you. So you may all have some familiarity with this. I'll go through it quickly. An 800 megawatt wind farm to power roughly 400,000 homes. About 1.6 million tons of CO2 per year to be extracted out of our energy grid, in addition to substantial reductions in NOx and other pollutants. At its nearest point, lying about 14.5 to 15 miles south to southwest of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Staging construction operations, it's a pretty substantial construction effort, will be operated out of New Bedford, and an operations and maintenance facility will be located on Martha's Vineyard. We're going to connect into the Mid-Cape, which has a range of advantages for our grid, largely in terms of reliability. The power is essentially to be purchased by the state's utilities to be spread statewide. The electrons ultimately stay in southeastern Massachusetts, but the electricity goes to ratepayers in the Commonwealth. The construction schedule, we're well underway in permitting, and I've got a later slide that I will unfortunately walk you through briefly. That's quite complicated, but we expect to start construction in the fourth quarter of 2019 and begin our commercial operation at the end of 2021. What you see in this picture is one of the electrical service platforms, which is about midway into the offshore wind facility. There'll be two of them in the facility. The wind generators, the project has learned from the European experience. They've got nearly 100 offshore wind facilities in Northern Europe, about over 4,000 turbines spinning. It's become a proven technology. In their siting, typically they've embraced an envelope concept. It's a fast-moving technology, so the best bet for ratepayers, for governments, and for all parties involved is to permit a range of options so that the best and most efficient construction occurs. So one reason I would bring this up is we've talked in part of our permitting with Nantucket representatives as part of our historic Section 106 federal consultation to determine historic impacts. The turbine design is a major part of that. Staying under a certain level will limit the amount of lighting and other protective efforts that will minimize visual impact at night. We're also committing to using ADLS after baseball season. ADLS. It's automatic aircraft detection system, which will drastically reduce any kind of nighttime visibility of lights offshore. Reduces it to about 1/1000th of the nighttime hours. So a substantial mitigative reduction of impacts in that sense. Let's see here. So a brief rundown of project benefits. Clearly, I don't need to go too deeply into the environmental benefits. We all understand climate change is a challenge for the region, challenge for communities like my own and for Nantucket, more so than most others. This really sets both the region and the country in a really important direction with pursuing clean energy. It's the biggest step we can take. Adding to that, as part of our bid, we know we're working in an area that's got other parties. There's marine mammal exposure there. The North Atlantic right whale, which is near and dear to my heart, is in crisis mode at the moment. and there's a need to do these projects properly so that we don't increase impact, and so that both the whales and humans and everyone else can benefit from the climate change impacts being reduced. So a $3 million fund was established as part of our bid to fund innovation to marine mammal protection. It's kind of a wide-ranging and broad conversation we're having with experts in the field as to what's the best way to purpose that funding to protect marine mammals, both as it relates to offshore wind and in a more general sense. So it's something we're really kind of excited to get moving as we approach financial close and construction and then operation. The mobilization of that fund will be an important part of the project. As far as general municipal economic and consumer benefits, there are a bunch of workforce development initiatives associated with the project. There's certainly a synergy with maritime industries in the region. From a consumer perspective, the DOER established or asserted that the project will result in $1.4 billion in ratepayer savings over business as usual. So there are some standard ratepayer benefits involved. Important in Nantucket, the project has established a resiliency and affordability fund, $1 million a year in each of 15 years, to support projects, including microgrids and addressing localized energy challenges, as well as other efficiency projects and rate relief. So Nantucket has been, the resiliency element was put in there with Nantucket squarely in mind. And we are, as we work forward through all the permitting and the complications of the project, we are looking at digging deep in with local communities as to what the priorities are and how to support that. I've had conversations with Lauren Sinatra at length, also Ms. Higgins, about the best way forward and the best information we can get from the community as to where those funds should go. And so just a bit about our outreach. I've been involved in the outreach effort directly on Nantucket for the last several months. That relationship extends back years. We have been most recently trying to catch, as I know it on Provincetown, sort of both the summer crowd and the winter crowd. The summer crowd's tourists and locals who are working their heads off, and as we get into the shoulder season, into the winter, it becomes more local. So we're trying to catch both of those and have a clear presence and keep listening. Been a lot of local discussion in the last several months, as well as a real effort to get the simulations and get project awareness out there. So starting in, what was it now, July? Starting in July and extending through, we're committed to extend all the way through into the middle of next year. We've got a visualization simulation downtown at the Shanty, which is hosted by Tobias, and we're actually, I think, very shortly going to be delivering another big visual simulation panorama to the energy coordinator, which may be hosted in her office, although it's quite large. I'm not sure if she's going to have the space for it. But anyways, it'll be word of the town. Just a brief thing that's in your packets there. Some of the highlights of our municipal outreach, as well as outreach to members of the general public, civic groups, and the like, local NGOs as well, and then a wider set of consultations, which some more applicable to the Nantucket community than others, but some of the leading state and federal environmental organizations. A range of topics, as you can imagine. Our discussions with fisheries interests are deeply involved and ongoing. We're doing a listening tour about pre and post research studies associated with fisheries, taking input from fishermen as to what we should be preparing ourselves for. So we're first out the gate in what is going to be a pretty substantial industry we expect for this region. And it's important that we get it right. It means ongoing communications with those experts, and it means ongoing communications with yourselves. I would want to close by just saying that I am available always. I hope to continue the conversation with you folks individually and with anyone who you think it's appropriate for us to reach out to. We have to tap into some of that local knowledge. I didn't make this slide, unfortunately. A range of governments did, but this is the permitting matrix that we're in currently. The green means we've begun these efforts, and the blue means they've been completed. We obviously hope to have all the blues filled in by the end of next year. What's important, there are many important elements of this slide, but I won't dig too much in other than to say There are state and federal environmental impact reports that are being processed and that are coming out regularly. I can give you folks more detail on when those dates are, but those are the areas for really the best areas for input in conversation. In addition to that, we've got our historic consultation, which is ongoing, that we're doing with BOEM, which is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and local officials. So that conversation really just started formally last week, and it'll continue for the coming months. We look forward to that. There is the potential for some mitigative efforts off-site that we're going to continue the conversation on. I think that's it. My contact info is there. You're welcome to email or call. My info is also on our website at vineyardwind.com.
Thank you, Nate. Any questions?
Yeah, Nate, I just wanted, from the consultation last week, it sounded like the paint color, the design changes, or design recommendations were recommendations from BOEM with the paint and the lights. But are those two things that Vineyard Wind is prepared to make?
Yes. So two of the main mitigation elements were choosing a color that reduces visual impact as best possible. It's a range of colors that the FAA authorizes, so we would go to the most favorable end, sort of the more towards the gray end. And with ADLS, that's part of our construction and operations plan. We call it the COP because we say that a lot. The construction operations plan, ADLS is a major part of that. We had a really good conversation actually, and came away with a couple of really good insights about how how we might be able to more detail some of our service operations, also sort of looking into the future. We've done a pretty detailed analysis of historic airline traffic, and just to not get too far into the weeds, but single-engine Cessnas would fly at a lower altitude, and those which would fly within this boundary, which is I think about within 1,100 feet of the turbine area and within a certain buffer zone, would trigger a lighting system. So the estimation from current air traffic, the last 10 years of air traffic indicates it's like roughly 2-minute intervals at a time, amounting to about 200 triggers, which would total about 3 hours and 49 minutes of lighting, based on current air traffic patterns. Of course, those do change, and so there was also a discussion about, so how do we deal with the eventualities that maybe it's more active or maybe less active than we anticipated. So yeah, we are committed to ADLS. That's a major part of our operation. It's obviously subject to approval by FAA and Coast Guard.
And I know you might not be able to comment, but this board sent a letter through Lorne many months ago now, suggesting or requesting for Vineyard Wind and BOEM to look at some other possible design changes that would minimize the visual impact, moving turbines, phasing the project, and some of those have been unfeasible. But we discussed those again, which are still, I believe, on the table, as well as the possibility of a community benefit agreement, perhaps similar to something you have with the vineyard. So I'm not sure if those are other ones that you can comment at all briefly. But
yeah, I mean, we're having that discussion. I think there are also some shorter term ways to work together in a meaningful and material way that we want to continue that conversation. It's good to have a group to tap into and also to cast the net wide in terms of ideas there. The Resiliency Fund is Nantucket is an eligible community, and we really hope that in the early going a project is funded there. There will be other elements that we want to discuss and things we hope to be bringing to the board that can help. There's a lot of mutual benefit here with respect to the energy challenges that are faced by Nantucket and being somewhat in the neighborhood of sort of the next frontier of energy development in the region.
thank you.
Any other comments, thoughts?
That's just a quick comment. I think we've come a long way from 10 years ago or so. I was on the FinCom 10 or 15 years ago, and everyone was fighting against Cape Wind, like very, very stridently. And one of my suggestions then, I think Toby and I were probably the only people saying we should be working with them to get benefit, not fighting it every step of the way. And I'm glad to see that that's kind of the direction that's taken, because this is an important issue for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I depending on what company I'm in, I admit regularly that I was part of the Cape Wind opposition, working for Rob O'Leary, and that can get me accolades or it can get me sideways looks depending on where it is. But we're in a different place now, and I appreciate that.
You'll
It's-
probably 50-50 here still, so
Okay,
be
okay.
careful. But
All right. We strike that from the record, maybe.
All right. Thank you, Nate.
Great, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to public hearings. I'd like to open a public hearing and consider utility petition from National Grid, install 2 hand holes and encased conduit for 45 Sankaty Road.